How's it going, Ed?
Good. So this is something I've kind of been curious about for a long time, and this guy, at least from my perspective, is kind of the market leader in it. Now, granted, to a general audience, this is a very narrow niche, but I think it will become increasingly important.
We
So,
are, if we are anything, it is narrow niche. That is what we've built everything on. So I am definitely interested in jumping into this. First though, I want to say the walkcar.com/store. Now, anybody who's listened to this show, they know you go to the walkcar.com/store and you can buy hats, t-shirts. We have water bottles, we have backpacks, we have all these things, and all of them help support the podcast and the blog. Listening helps us because that helps grow our audience. So share us on social media, whatever. But if you want to directly support us, that's where you go. What are you getting for that? You're getting an entertaining show every single week from people like me and Ed. And I've got what, 20 years? Is that what we've decided? 25 years of
sounds better than a quarter century, but
quarter century of automotive journalism and content creation here, just sitting around. That's turned into selling merchandise. And that's my life.
Ed Sanchez, likewise, 20 plus years in automotive content creation and moderation. Current day job, automotive electronics industry analyst, and the Watt Car blog and podcast co-founder and contributor. And I'm going to hand it over to our special guest today, have him introduce herself, and we'll get right into I think what will be a very interesting conversation. So
Thanks, guys. Scott Case, CEO and co-founder of Recurrent. Recurrent is we analyze used electric vehicle batteries and help people buy and sell used EVs with confidence.
excellent.
And my just to pick up on your sort of each of your life stories. I have a couple of degrees from fancy colleges and grad schools, and now I get to tell my parents I'm pretty much a used car dealer. So
That's awesome.
Nice.
But the most
just yeah.
advanced used cars.
Oh, the great used cars. Yeah, yeah. The future, right?
So
Yeah.
kind of walk us through Recurrent. Like, what is it? How did it come to be? And then from there, we've got like 1,000 other questions.
Yeah. Well, let me start with what it was when we started, and then I'll kind of get to what it is now. So, briefly, 4 years ago, I was exiting my last company, which was we worked in the home energy efficiency space, trying to help people like analyze their electric usage at home and upgrade the efficiency of their houses. And I at the time was sort of thinking about our customers were electric utilities and sort of understanding more and more about what they were working on, integrating renewable energy onto the grid, which means a lot of battery storage, and thought, gosh, like, wouldn't it be cool if we can reuse decommissioned EV batteries for grid storage? Because like utilities are cheap, they're going to want to do this low cost thing. So I went to sort of start that as my next company, but decided it was too early to do that. There're just not enough batteries that are have been pulled out of EVs. So in the process of thinking about that company, realized like, well, what's working inventory in progress for decommissioned batteries? Well, it's used EVs, right? And just started kind of digging into the questions that people were asking when it came to buying a used electric car and how they were different from the questions people have always asked to buy a used combustion engine car, and was like, wow, this is just something that's broken. Somebody needs to step up and provide sort of like answers to those questions to facilitate that used market. So that's basically where we started. This is again 4 years ago.
Mhm.
Early pandemic was when we founded the company, so that was pretty early in the used EV market. So talk about the narrow niche. Like, this is the ultimate like big fish small pond situation, because this pond at that time was minuscule. So that's kind of where we started.
Yeah, so I'm one of those people that always I go on Craigslist daily, pretty much, and you just look around. You're not even shopping. You're just looking around. And this is a problem
What
that
categories are you looking around in on Craigslist?
so one of the problems that I've got is like being from the automotive industry and being an enthusiast my entire life is I know exactly when it comes to internal combustion, I know exactly what I'm looking for. I know how to research the engines. I know how to research the transmissions. I can rebuild some of the stuff myself. Like I know all of this. And with EV, I'm an EV enthusiast, but at the same time, man, there's like it's completely different.
Yeah.
I don't know anything when it comes to if somebody comes and says, okay, well, I've got this car and it's got 300,000 miles and the check engine light's on. And I go, oh, well, it's your catalytic converters. Like, I know what's wrong and I know I can research that. And it's probably $1,500 for me to fix and yada, yada, yada. With EVs, like, it's a big unknown because the industry is not really mature enough to have a lot of that, like, decades worth of knowledge for you to sift through. So this is something that's kind of like near and dear to my heart because the flip side of all this is I'm super cheap. I only buy used vehicles. And so I need to know what I'm getting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Ki-
you mentioned Craigslist, like that in those early days before I even started the company, I was looking at used Leaf ads on Craigslist because I've sold a couple of cars on Craigslist myself as well. And it was the weirdest thing that people were describing. It was like, oh, they'd sort of describe the color and the odometer and everything. And then they'd say, I have 10 bars still, or I have 9 bars, or I have 11 bars. And I'm like, what are bars, right? And it turns out that was a early way for the first and second generation Leafs to sort of like a vague estimate of battery capacity. But the fact that they were all putting that into the Craigslist posting kind of told you they were getting questions about this. And
Mhm.
now that's very Leaf specific. They don't even do it anymore. But, the broader point I think is exactly right. Like we all grew up like understanding how to be an owner or understanding how to be a buyer or a seller of combustion engine cars, and you learned it from your parents or your grandparents. And like you can't have learned all those things about electric cars. Like you couldn't have learned it from your parents. So we are really creating this sort of like forging a new path here.
Yeah. I mean, so I got to ask you, and I think certainly from the founding of it to today, um, I'd say general knowledge has probably increased among
In that small
car.
pond, right?
Yeah,
In the broad sort of set of like
sure.
mainstream
But I
car
mean,
buyers, no.
I'm just curious in your interactions either with, car buyers or consumers, or even businesses and dealerships, if you found there's still a lot of FUD around EVs, battery health, all that, because I still hear it from, and maybe it's the company I keep, and maybe I need to get new friends, but they're like, oh, well, don't you have to replace the batteries every 3 years, and they're $20,000 and blah blah blah. And it's like, no, I'm
Yeah,
just wondering how much you encounter that, and kind of, how that kind of ties into the education process, both for business prospects and consumers potentially. So.
yeah. I think there's two different distinct groups of people out there. There is one set of people who are like active and willfully interested in spreading FUD, and it doesn't matter. It's a game of whack-a-mole. Like it's, you say like you show them data on, what, batteries don't wear down, have to get replaced every 3 years or 5 years or whatever. Okay, great. But what about, and there's like 5 or 6 or 10 different things, and there's a limitless number of those myths, right? And they will just pivot from one to the next because they don't want change. And that could be because they don't want change because their business is sort of built on combustion engine sort of like infrastructure, or it could be that that's just like where their head's at. The other category of people are just the people that didn't grow up with these cars, which is everybody else. And they're genuinely open and trying to learn, how to do this, how to be a used buyer, how to be an EV owner. But it's different, like to give you an example, I I bought my first EV was a Volkswagen ID4. Love the car, right? I got 3 years of free charging from Electrify America, and I used it exactly 3 times before deciding it was not worth it, even at free, because every time was a train wreck, right? Like I'm an EV guy, but like figuring out like, okay, what stations can I go to, and what's like what's safe, how far is to go, and how does the car behave differently in winter. But like I didn't come into it like looking for a problem. I came into it with a spirit of, okay, this is different. What do I do now? Like, and that's just, there's just two different mindsets there. And I think it's like important to keep those apart.
Can you kind of walk me through the company?
Okay. Yeah.
Like what, I've been on the website. Why do I go to the website? Who is the website even for? Is it, start square one.
Sure. So we have basically called like two different things, right? So our the majority of our business is a data business. So for a used car dealer, a wholesale auction, fleet, like a fleet remarketer, anyone who's involved in the selling of a used car, we can, given a VIN, we can basically come back with a called like a battery kind of like condition report, right? There's some interesting nuances that I think we'll get into around like, what do we mean by that? How do we get the data and everything like that? But like, if your question is like, how far can I go in this car? How's that going to change in the winter? How's this compare to others? We can sort of do that, right? The second piece of it is for EV owners, and that's, we have a free product. So, Ed, are you signed up yet? Did you sign up your car?
A mutual friend has been prodding me to do this
Okay,
for quite a while,
right.
so
All
probably
right.
need to get on board. But
All right. Well, yeah. So free product for EV owners, and you can sign up your car, and then we basically pull data from your car through the vehicle telematics over the air, no hardware involved,
And
then
that integrates with the systems like the Tesla system, the
totally.
GM
Yep.
and
Yep.
the
That's
Hyundai and
right. Yeah.
whatnot.
So we cover 65 makes and models of battery electric and plug-in hybrid cars. And essentially, like, these cars are all streaming data anyway off to the manufacturer and also to power the iPhone app for that car. And so we're basically like plugging into that same data endpoint. And then what happens is, like, once a month you get a report from Recurrent that just says, here's how you're doing, here's how it compares to others, here's how it compares to your car when it was new. Are there any sort of like serious concerns? Usually that's the answer is no. And then just going from there. So it's a cool information product for an EV owner. We're sort of like helping, set rules of thumb of like how much should you charge it for the longevity of the car, that sort of thing. But the real value comes when you go to sell that car, is like you kind of have your complete set of records, for it. And so when you go to sell it, whether it's on Craigslist or you settle a dealer, you can use that information to get sort of higher sale price. It's the modern equivalent of, keeping all of your service records in your glove compartment and then showing it to the next owner to say, look, I took care of it. And, so you know what you're getting when you get this car.
Yeah, it reminded me of I bought, man, this would have been early 2000s. I bought a 1985 Volkswagen Scirocco. And the thing was like, it was pretty beat up. I spent like $700 on it. But the guy handed me, because he was original owner, he handed me the envelope, the like folder with all the receipts back to day one, with every oil change, everything, throughout the history. And I'm like, I'm buying a $700 car. Like, I don't need any of this stuff. This car has seen its better days, and it's about to go through worse because I'm building a track car. But that kind of the maintenance schedule that you expect with internal combustion, there isn't. Part of the beauty of
Totally.
EVs
Yeah,
is you eliminate.
To be a good EV owner does not mean getting an oil change every 3,000 miles.
Yeah.
Like, it's, like, so how do you prove it if there's no maintenance?
So,
like, yeah, that's I think the value prop that we hit there.
So I mean, and I've to be fair and kind of prep for this, I did listen to some other podcast episodes you've been on. I don't know how much I want to tap dance around this, but there's another.
Here comes a gotcha question. I can feel it.
Very,
this is a hard-hitting podcast right here.
A very well-known car valuation company, I'll just say. I think you probably know who I'm talking about. That has created a very kind of prominent brand name to the point where consumers are even asking for it in a used car transaction, either through a dealer or private party. I mean, I think it would be, and it sounds like this is kind of happening like on a limited basis. Like you said, for those people in the know that are knowledgeable about EVs, asking for a recurrent battery report.
Well, that's
So,
that is
mhm,
happening more and more. Like,
mhm,
we work with dealers all over the country, especially EV specialist dealers, and people walk into their store and they're like, "Oh, like I came in because you guys have recurrent reports, and like that is
mhm,
part of the peace of mind for me, right?" So that's happening. Like we get calls from dealers who aren't working with us who have like,
mhm,
what's this recurrent thing that, that people keep on asking about? Like it's an ultimate big fish, small pond situation, right?
mhm,
But from a valuation perspective, we are now starting to have an influence on that. So last year we kicked off our relationship with Black Book, one of the major valuation
mhm,
companies, and now when you go and run whoever you are, when you go and run a used car valuation with Black Book's tools, it basically like references the battery kind of information from Recurrent and then provides there's a mileage adjusted value, there's a regional adjustment, there's a history adjustment if the car was in accidents, and then there's also a battery adjustment.
mhm.
And so that is beginning to kind of like reflect into the financial valuation of these used cars.
So that brings up another question. And I think I sent this along with the call invite. So organizations, for instance, like Kelly Blue Book, NADA, um, other kind of valuation companies, I guess. Do you consider them more partners or more competitors or frenemies, to use kind of a Silicon Valley term? I mean, how do you see those guys?
Yeah, I mean, uh, an electric car is still a car, and so it
Hmm.
still matters. Like, was it in accidents? Did it get sort of like the recall
Hmm.
done? How many owners? What color is it? Like, what's the
Hmm.
condition of the inside and the outside? Like, all those things matter. Um, the battery is a part of that, right? And
Hmm.
so we are a data provider to organizations like that. And generally speaking, by the way, like there is just the absence of any information about battery means that people like assume the worst.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
like what we have seen just again and again in our research and consumer behavior is like uh, providing some information, even if the battery is not in awesome shape, is better than nothing,
Hmm.
because it sort of like it sort of assuages a doubt that people have.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Going,
we don't do financial valuations of cars,
Hmm.
like, so we are not a competitor to those kinds of companies. We're a data supplier for this key piece for this particular kind of car.
yeah, going back to the Leaf example that you gave earlier, like when I was briefly shopping for one of those before I realized, wow, all those batteries are they kind of toast for the the early ones.
Well, the early
Uh,
one, yeah.
Yeah,
They're still fine, and some
they're
have gotten replaced. Some with
yeah,
higher capacity batteries than what they originally had. So you have a car with a ton of miles on it that's really old, that's going further than it did when it was new. So it's like it's
yeah. But
a different world.
what I discovered was if they didn't mention anything about the battery, I didn't even want to touch it. But then the people that mentioned something about the
Yeah,
battery, it was quite often 4 bars or something. It could drive 40 miles, 60 miles, whatever it is. And
yeah,
I'm like,
No, thanks.
this is not what I'm looking for.
yeah,
But that information, either they supplied me the information and I went, okay, I didn't want it, or they didn't supply the information, in which case I assumed they were hiding something,
yeah,
and thus I
yeah,
didn't want it, and thus I do not own a Leaf because I could not find one that had the replaced battery or had a higher
yeah,
capacity battery.
yeah.
And these are all the older ones because, like I said, I'm cheap and I buy used.
Yeah.
Uh,
By the way, there's another like little like very small niche of people within this industry that go around looking for cooked batteries that are still under warranty and specifically go buy those 4 bar batteries, like knowing they can go and sort of take it to the manufacturer and get a warranty replacement, get a brand new battery at the 7.5 year mark. So
yes,
Not the
yes.
worst strategy, but you
takes
got to
all
be pretty
kinds. Yeah,
committed.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. It's a contrarian play for sure.
Yeah. So I'm curious. I mean, obviously EVs. Do you also do it for plug-in hybrids or even like regular hybrids? I know, like on the earlier Priuses, that's kind of basically pre-telematics. So that's probably. I mean, do you have like a model year cutoff or some kind of requirements in terms of cars that could onboard onto your platform?
Yeah, we cover, it's like 85% of battery electric vehicles on the
Mhm.
road, essentially what could show up in the used market, and then our coverage of plug-in hybrids is lower for for sure, and we don't cover
Mhm.
mild hybrids at all. So it's got to have
Okay,
a plug for us to
sure,
be even
gotcha.
in our universe. The set of like how what's covered and what's not, it ends up being somewhat of a function of age, like
Mhm.
so I don't know if you guys remember, if this is on your radar, the 3G networks like shut down like a couple
Oh
of
yeah,
years ago, I want to
that
say, and
that's my
yeah,
day job wheelhouse, so I'm
yeah, great.
very
So
familiar with all that.
when 3G shut down, like we lost a whole bunch of the earlier Leafs and
Yeah.
like e-golfs, I want to say. So we have other ways of getting data from some of them to kind of keep those models alive, but like but some of the stuff like pre, let's say 2018,
Mhm.
it starts to get a little sparse in terms of data.
So
There are also
effectively
not very many
4G
cars
and
on
up
those.
connected
Yeah,
vehicles.
4G and up, no problem. Although, no, I won't say no problem. You also have to be an EV owner on our platform, you
Mhm.
have to have at least the base level of connected services from your OEM. So with Tesla, that's free. With some of the other ones, that's free. But then but some OEMs are like trying to say, well, I'm gonna charge you $10 a month for like,
Yeah.
the basic bundle. And if somebody is like, I'm not going to use that for anything else, they're unlikely to want to pay that just to get
Mhm.
to be able to use Recurrent. So
So basically a live persistent data connection,
yeah,
effectively.
that's right. And you don't have to pay the premium one. It's like whatever the
Mhm.
lowest level one is, what is for any
Basic
given
telematics,
OEM.
yeah.
Yeah, the basic stuff is what we would need to is what you need for our sort of owner product. But
So
the cool thing is, like,
mhm.
we also, we don't have to have every single car that shows up at used sort of signed onto our platform, because we kind of see enough. We build up, and this gets into methodology, we build up like a really, really big sample set, and then we can use other data points on a car that just shows up on a used car lot that we have never been connected to essentially like do a pretty good estimate of, hey, your range on that car is going to be between 200 and 210 miles, for instance, versus an EPA
Mhm.
of 260. And it turns out that, like, when you can the machine learning model we built for that, it's actually like sort of plus or minus 5 or 10 miles in a lot of those cases. So you actually get a pretty good sense of what you're going to get.
Yeah, that to me is like, so that was going to be like my next question of like, you're not going to get everybody. And
Right.
so data's good to get like a kind of overview, but then what are you going to use? What could you use that data for later? Because it's gotta help everybody.
Yeah.
Realistically, you go to like,
Mhm.
the Kelly Blue Book value of the vehicle, and well, it's not going to evaluate everything, but it kind of like gives you a generalities of, you've put in some criteria and you've got that. And ultimately, it's kind of what I did when I was leaf shopping. Was I went through and I did the research and I noticed the things that were happening, and the amount of range that you could get and the degradation of the batteries and where kind of that cutoff was going to be, and then was like, oh, well, I'm not comfortable with that. What I'd really like is like a threshold of like an overview of all of the vehicles. Is that something like, as a buyer, how do I narrow down what I want to get if I go, I want something that doesn't have horrible battery degradation. You obviously don't want to get the old generations. Like, while
Yeah.
we're an EV podcast, we're like the modern generation EV podcast, because the early stuff we're learning. That
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
that
More
was
more kind of science experiment. Yeah.
yeah, like I
Yeah.
don't really want to own a late 2000s EV. Those are not those are not on my list.
Well, yeah,
Uh,
there aren't any, right? Like late aughts, basically. Like, I mean, the
Yeah.
yeah,
first Leafs are like 2012, so
yeah.
2011
No, you'd
maybe.
be
So
getting into like
yeah.
man, when I forgot when the first like RAV4, but there was like Mazda had their EV.
Oh yeah,
They're
that's true.
like,
Actually, the Volt, yeah, the plug-in hybrid. There was a handful of
there were
smattering of that stuff.
handfuls
Well, I mean
of,
the early like carb compliance days, but for all
yeah,
intents and
Right.
purposes, those are
Yeah.
in the
No, I
history
get
books.
you. And from a
yeah,
volume perspective, like there is a, like
2018 plus.
yeah.
2018 plus like
Yeah.
represents like something like 90% of the EVs that are on the
Mhm.
road, at this point. So it's not like, I think it's reasonable to just say, hey, that's where you as a podcast focus, that's mostly where we as a company focus, but knowing that there's a long tail that goes earlier than that. The nice thing is that like Tesla's being the majority of that,
Mhm,
you know, going back to 2012, like that's one where connectivity has stayed really, really good. So we have a
mhm,
ton of data on Teslas going all the way back, you know, including, you know, back to 2012s that are still on the road that
mhm,
we, you know, have seen like with hundreds of thousands of miles on them. So like
mhm. The
it's,
Model
you
S's,
know,
yeah.
yeah, those Model S's from way back in the day. So
So this this is another kind of area of curiosity for me is I know between the different OEMs, they have very different approaches and philosophies to data privacy, data access. Um, I mean, maybe we'll touch on this in a little bit, but the whole idea of right to repair. I mean, case in point, Aptera. Granted, they're not on the road yet, but they've publicly come out um, very strongly in favor of right to repair, and I'm assuming that would also include data access. Um, how has that been an obstacle in kind of building your platform? Is some OEMs just don't want to cooperate and they're like, no, we're not going to share this with you? Or what are, I guess, the nuances, or are there even laws kind of mandating a certain level of access to data, or just kind of how that works?
oh, it's a complete Wild West rodeo out there. It's just you can't there's no laws here yet. There's a couple of things changing on that.
Mhm,
But OEMs are all over the place in terms of their sort of like comfort with data being kind of like out there,
mhm,
who can access it, what data is available. And that's like honestly like a huge part of the complexity of our business is like navigating that, let alone, and then so like it's not only the OEM sort of like stance and ability to kind of like allow for data syndication, but also the just battery chemistries like are just continue
mhm.
to evolve as well. So there's just like this complexity in terms of
NMC,
like the
LFP.
underlying, yeah,
Yeah.
like in you know like where the cells are from, all that kind of stuff
Mhm,
is sort of different as well. So um, our belief is if we can just be the easy way to just like at a glance, oh, this is fine, this one's fine, or
mhm,
this, you know, to get back to Phil, your point about like you weren't comfortable with that leaf because you, well, it can only get 40 miles, and gosh, like, you know, maybe that's only 35 in the winter, you know, like somebody, that car that you saw was fine for somebody, you know, that somebody probably lives in a small town, somewhere where it's warm, and they just go to get groceries, and that'll be fine for a couple of years. They could probably buy that car for $2,000, you know, and run it for 3 or 4 years, and then think about like, do I want to get a refurbished pack or something like that? But for you, you know, if you were anywhere cold, like doesn't make sense, you know, like stay away from that, you know. But it's just there's just I think there is a right use case for every car that can run somewhere, and you just kind of help people figure that out. Like, how does this fit in my lifestyle or
So
not?
back to kind of I kind of half-asked a question, I think.
Okay, got
Um,
it.
that the data that you can take take from all these everything that you're getting, where as a consumer, where can I is this how do I find that information? Or is this something where like I'd go to like a I'm shopping for a car at CarMax and they would have your report there that says, Recurrent says,
Yeah.
um,
So
Chevy Bolts from year to year have yada yada
Yeah,
yada.
so
that
at
that
that
act.
aggregate
Mhm,
level, you're saying.
Yeah.
So yeah, first of all, so at an aggregate level, like okay, the 2019 Chevy Bolt Premier gets like should get between this range and this range, and here's how that varies from extreme heat to extreme cold. So that's like kind of like the first level that you might, you know, look for. So we do have like that's one of the things we do with all of the data is we aggregate it up into those like make, model, year levels, and we license that to, you know, places that you might go and do research for. So we publish that, some of that on our own site actually, like, you know, the Recurrent Auto in the research section. There's some of it in there, but we do license that out as a sort of like a data product. Um, and you know, it's valuable also not just to the shopping process, but like to insurance companies or warranty companies to just understand, like, hey, generally speaking, like, I want to create a statistical model that like that sort of like predicts like how far are these things going to go, and like that's a range is not a direct predictor of battery lifespan, like life expectancy of what's remaining, but it's a handy like kind of indicator that's wide that we are able to make widely available on every on every model that we cover. So that's like the aggregate level. And then if you want to get into the individual level, you would go to cars.com or an Edmunds, both of them customers of ours, and you can go and like search for, real world range. And, like I want an EV, and here's my price filter, here's my location, and I want to be able to drive at least 190 miles, or something like that. So that they're incorporating our data and using it to sort of allow people to do that kind of shopping.
So now for somebody like Ed, because now you're getting all this data, and so Ed goes and he signs up and he gets the report for he starts tracking everything with his car, and that helps him when he goes to resell his car.
Yep.
Is what else is there, or is it largely is it the proof of the proof is in the pudding? You go to resell it, and then somebody like me doesn't get turned off by the 40 miles of range, because now I don't have to believe Ed when I buy his car. He can show me, here's the degradation over the last 5 years that I've owned the car, and you can see it's decreasing at X percentage per year. So you could then calculate.
Yeah, it is just about like helping Ed be transparent, like helping him, like your story about the Volkswagen, the $700 Volkswagen. It's like, hey, here's all the paperwork, like, and this is the proof. And the interesting thing there is like, yeah, it might not be a good story. Like Ed's car might be worn down. And so it's his data, it's his choice whether to share it or not. But like, I do think that there sort of gets to a world like where if you don't show anything, the person's going to assume it's in bad shape. But that with our customer agreements is like, we will not disclose your vehicle's data without your explicit permission to do that. And because that just felt like honestly the right way of doing it for our members.
Yeah, every EV I see on Craigslist where they don't tell me what range they're getting, I assume it's because it's bad. Like 100% of the time.
That's where people are. Yeah, that's where people are. And
so I just don't want to touch it. Like one of the guys was, it was selling an old Model S, and it was a great price. It was like, it was ridiculous. It was like $6,000 for this Model S that had unlimited supercharging still attached to it. Never said the range. I'm like, geez,
like, it's like you'll be glad to have that free supercharging when you can only get 30 miles between.
Like I'm not interested because of the information that is missing from this. But how many people are savvy enough to even know what's not being said?
Yeah. Well, I do think people, it is like everyone has owned an iPhone or a series of iPhones for the last 15 years. And so I think people do have an intuitive understanding of how lithium-ion batteries sort of like degrade. And for the phone, it means you can't talk all day. For the car, it means you can't drive as far as you could when it was new. But that said, like, these batteries are rarely failing. It's very unusual, and in some cases, like in a lot of cases, when they do, it is under warranty, and there was a manufacturing issue, and so they're holding up really well. So I do think that there's sort of like a disconnect between the fear that people have from their phone and what is the reality on the road, with a car, which is not an iPhone on wheels, as many people say it is.
So I want to dig in a little. I want to kind of pop the hood open and kind of ask some more kind of nuts and bolts questions here. But so
wait, hang on. The pop the hood analogy on an EV, I just have to say,
pop the front guy.
The front. So I was looking at a major auto retailers trade-in process, and they were like the pictures that they wanted, and one of them was like, open your hood and take a picture of the motor. And I was like, really? It's like, we have a Model Y as well. I'm like, you want a picture of the frunk is what you're asking me to do. Like, what do you expect to get in there?
Here's a piece of plastic.
Hilarious.
Well, it's just like when I hear the stories of people receiving coupons for oil changes in the mail for their EV. But anyway,
go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
It's okay. I guess the point I was because I've read plenty of stories and articles about how accurate or truthful the range, predicted range or displays are. Some OEMs are, deliberately a little pessimistic to give people, a little more of a margin of safety. Some, I'm not going to name names, but I drive one, are maybe a little optimistic and give you kind of a false sense of hope in terms of range. In terms of the data feed that you're collecting, is this kind of like behind the scenes telematics data, not maybe necessarily what's being displayed on the display? Or also conversely, if you're dealing with some OEMs that are kind of blocking some of the data access, and it's like, no, we're not going to share this with you. Do you actually bring cars in and actually do like physical testing and validation to say, okay, they're not going to share this data with us from an enterprise standpoint, or they're kind of blocking us from accessing it, so we're just going to, kind of put the clamps on ourselves and figure it out?
Yeah, this is so interesting. So yeah, vehicle dashboards they lie all the time. Sometimes they lie for good reasons, because your car doesn't know that you're about to drive 75 miles an hour up a mountain pass, and then when you're on that pass, it doesn't know that you're about to get to the top of the pass and drive down the other side. And so like every dashboard is sort of like, I think, has its own special snowflake in terms
Guessometer.
of like showing, yeah, it's guessometer. And you're right, different manufacturers take it that differently. So that's an unreliable but very accessible source of information, right? Now, if you flip that around, like the other extreme is, detailed deep diagnostics off of the battery pack, that is, and getting that at scale, like much more reliable, but almost inaccessible. And that I say almost because we should just sidebar and remind me to come back to this, like to talk about the upcoming CARB regulations that are coming out of California that will take effect in about a year, which is going to start to change this story, although slowly. But so we've chosen basically like, hey, let's get we like we would rather have the perfect data, but since it's not really possible to get, and none of the manufacturers are making it easy to get that out of there, we're going to go with what's accessible and sort of like figure out how to kind of correct for the errors. And essentially what we do is, like, you can't believe a dashboard if you see it once and see what it says on there, but if you have an ability to get that information, that same information, what's displayed on the dashboard, and you can get it a whole bunch of times in different weather conditions, in different and compare it to, like, that your car, maybe you start with a range of 300 miles and you drive a mile, and the remaining range now says 298. You're like, oh, wait a minute, how'd that happen? So you drove a mile and your remaining range dropped by 2 miles. Like, so when you keep on doing that over and over and over again, and you have like millions of data points like what we do, you can sort of like reverse engineer how those dashboards work, and then figure out like what's an outlier, what's the gap between what let's call it ideal range, like what it says on a lot of those dashboards, and then typical range, and then look at how typical range varies in different, climates. So you're not going to be able to drive as far in the dead of winter in a cold place as you can in the, warmest summer with the same exact car. Because not because the battery is any different, but because of the way the heating system and the air conditioning system and how efficient they are. So we've really focused around, like, let's do the even though it's a proxy for battery, like but it's the one that actually matters to people, and that's how far can I go, and how does that change in different weather conditions. And we basically like brute force that, just taking reading after reading after reading across tens of thousands of cars in all the different climate zones, to essentially create a model of what's good, what's normal, and what's not that good for every single different make and model of vehicle that we cover. And that's the approach.
Yeah. So in terms of the display, like on a report,
Yeah.
Is it like a little meter, like good, bad?
Yeah, we
You
have
know.
a little dial. Yeah, it's sort of a little meter. Like, is this good? Is this bad? For and actually, I wouldn't say good and bad. It's the big comparison is what percent of your vehicle's original range do you still get with this car today?
Hmm.
That's like the kind of
So
the big hero
percentage.
stat.
So
Yeah, yeah.
between like 70 and well, it wouldn't be 100. I'm probably no used EV is 100, but I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's
Say
it's
70 to
I get
95 or
90% of
whatever.
the range that I did when I was
Yeah.
new, and importantly, it's not the denominator there is not EPA, because EPA range is
Hmm.
also garbage, like, and doesn't it's not at all accurate, and the different manufacturers play different games with that. So
Yeah.
for every single make and model of covered vehicle, we make, model, battery pack configuration, we basically like
Hmm.
calculate our own like new range statistics, that becomes the denominator for that, and that's because we
Hmm.
see enough of these cars when they're brand new, and then see how they're, when new in the super cold, when new in the super warm, and then everything in between. So that sort of becomes the basis of our comparison.
Yeah, I
You
see
asked, sorry, you asked
a
about comparison, testing, and kind of like, do we ever plug stuff in? We have done a bunch of different kind of cross-platform testing
Hmm.
with like plug-in ride-along devices, where they're just like mining telematics like every couple of seconds, and sort of like, compared that to the way that we do this.
Hmm.
We've done side-by-side testing with some of the OEMs where they're like comparing our sort of like methodology to their own internal like deep battery diagnostics. It turns out
Hmm.
actually matches up pretty well.
Hmm.
Um, and then we're continuing to sort of like poke at and try kind of like figuring out how that sort of like over the air streaming methodology works versus like various plug-in diagnostic tests that like service repair shops might have, for instance, that are and then the other one is like, we don't our number isn't like a number that allows you to say, to go into a dealership and be like, I have a warranty claim because this dropped below 70% state of health. Like,
Hmm.
we don't give a state of health number.
Okay.
And so the manufacturers each have their own test that's like, if you walk in and you say, I have a warranty claim, I want this, I'm within 7 years, I'm less than 100,000 miles, whatever the exact warranty is.
Hmm.
They will plug it into their own proprietary machine, and they will say, does this
Does
qualify
this
or
meet
not?
our
Yeah,
internal
that's
criteria?
right. Yeah, and they're
Okay.
all different. There's no
Hmm.
standards for this out there of like, there's generally 8 years, 100,000 miles, but like, what the state of health percentage is that qualifies is different, and how that is calculated is different from manufacturer to manufacturer. No standard.
So I listened to a podcast a couple weeks ago, and there I found out they're actually one of your clients, EV Auto in
Oh
Utah.
yeah, Alex Lawrence, awesome
Yeah,
guy. Yeah,
Alex, yeah.
yeah,
And obviously he's very knowledgeable about EVs. I mean, that's what they specialize in. They're
that's
kind of
all they do. Yep.
that's their jam. So in your experience, typically whether they approach you or you approach them, what have you found is the general knowledge level of dealerships, in terms of your product, what it represents, the I guess the value proposition for them in terms of marketing their vehicles to customers, or evaluating, incoming cars from auction or whatever.
Yeah.
Have you found from your the origins, like, 4 years ago versus now, would you say the knowledge level is higher, or do you find you still kind of face the same kind of, EV 101 type questions?
Well, it's a spectrum, and Alex Lawrence at EV Auto is like on the extreme end of the spectrum in terms of being
Hmm.
knowledgeable about, uh, all things used EVs, right? And
Hmm.
so, um, on the other end is like kind of like there's a lot of regional variances, like how interested
Hmm.
is your customer base in EVs?
Like
Like, there are
rural
plenty of places that
Kansas
are,
versus
yeah,
Bay
yeah,
Area.
but I will
Yeah.
say, like, the EV specialist dealers that have built great businesses, they're not all in the kind of classic places you would expect.
Hmm.
There's a dealer, a Chevy dealer in like Ohio, that went from selling very, very few, used EVs at all, to all of a sudden, like, when the used EV rebate sort of snapped into place this January, where you can get $4,000 discount on a used EV that qualifies, like all of a sudden selling hundreds of used Bolts a month, like in the middle of Ohio, like just because that becomes an incredibly affordable car that is great for a limited income person who's like doesn't want to pay the repair costs and can't have a huge gasoline bill every month. So it's not lining up in the places that I think, like, if you just thought about it at a top level, is where you would always expect.
Hmm.
But you asked about dealer kind of knowledge and how the value prop they see. I think like there's like a couple of pieces to this for a dealer to work with Recurrent. Like one is the obvious one. I want to retail, used EVs effectively. My customers are asking for something here, and they've found that if they put Recurrent reports and Recurrent badges on their cars, they sell their cars faster, and they just sort of skip some objections, and they've got a third party that sits there, and it's not the dealer saying no, this
Mhm.
car's fine. They've got
Third
Recurrent
party
as a known,
validation. Yeah.
third party. I mean, there's a lot of examples of that in the
Mhm.
industry. Um, the second piece of it is all their incoming cars, whether they're getting from auction or from trade-ins or private party purchases, like they want to have some sense of, if they're going to be held accountable when they sell it, they want to be able to take that into account when they buy the car,
Mhm.
and they want to avoid buying something that's a problem. And so that becomes a big part of the value prop. And then the last piece is actually like not something we talked about a ton, but is turns out to be a pretty big deal for an EV dealer. Uh, when I said we help with the EV owner sell, well, actually we do that more directly than just like letting you share your stats on Craigslist when you post it. When our owners who are on our platform, again, free consumer platform, you should sign your car up, recurrentauto.com. When they go to sell, we will connect them with EV specialist dealers if they want, and who will value that information in particular, and they end up being able to sell directly, and it's just super easy. We've sort of handpicked the folks that are not going to be sketchy operators, and so that actually ends up being a really, really nice ease of use. You can sell it through anywhere, but our bet is you'll be able to sell it through our network of knowledgeable EV dealers at a premium. So that ends up being, that's the seller value prop. The dealer value prop is like, I get access to all of these hyper EV nerds that are really focused on like taking care of their batteries,
Mhm.
and so I know all the stuff I get from Recurrent in terms of like cars that we send them to potentially acquire. They're the cherry inventory. So it looks like a great source of inventory for folks like EV Auto, as well as all of the data.
So from that standpoint, have you found it's more a matter of dealers coming to you or marketing to dealers, or like 50/50, or what would you say
Yeah,
roughly?
it's a little of everything. I think that generally speaking, when a dealer decides, like, I'm going to get serious about used EVs and I'm going to be the king of used EVs in Virginia Beach, for instance, or, whatever, Houston, Texas, they there's like, oh, there's three things I got to do, to be able to
Mhm.
do that. And one of them is I'm just going to like sign up with Recurrent on the data side. I'm going to get cars from them, and then it's sort of off to the races from there. They got to do the used EV. They got to register for the used EV tax rebate. Like there's just like there's a little checklist, and we're on that checklist basically at the top. So, but not every dealer is there yet. So
Mhm.
it's, I think that there are plenty of dealers who, it's not so much that they care or don't care about Recurrent or like us or don't like us. They're just not ready for used EVs for whatever
Mhm.
reason, and that's fine. They'll eventually get there. But for right now, I'd say there's like, in any sort of major metro area, there's probably a couple of dealers that figured out, oh, I can be the first mover and just like stamp my name as like, this is where you go to get used
Just
EVs.
dominate the
Sometimes it's
market. Yeah.
independent specialists. Sometimes it's forward-looking franchise dealers like Eastern's
Mhm.
Automotive Group in the Delmarva area in DC, Maryland. Like those guys are doing tons of used EVs. They are absolutely crushing it. Like a huge portion of their overall franchise used
Hmm.
business, because they were the ones who said, we're going to own this market, and they're a customer of ours as well. So like, I think that, again, it's not everybody, but the ones that are jumping in and jumping in fully are really like, they're getting this huge head start.
The fascinating thing to me is the we're in an era where everything is getting data and what you can do with the data, and it's usually like scary things. But here, like you mentioned earlier, EPA, and it's all over the place. It's like if you believe EPA, Teslas go really far and Porsches don't go far at all. But the reality is they kind of meet in the middle, and you don't know though. Like it's so far off that if there was somewhere where you had somebody compiling the data and then you could go in and actually know
Yeah.
what you're getting, whether it's new, whether it's used, that all that data is there and it can be used. It's like there's websites and stuff that do range tests and all this stuff, but every range test is that car with that driver on that day with that wind, with that humidity, up that grade, down that hill, with this traffic. I'm not going to get what they got. I mean, who knows? They drive 70 miles an hour. I can only drive 50 miles an hour. Like you don't know. But if you can compile the data and you can average these things out, you can actually come up with use cases that are like realistic as to what you're going to get. And that's what I really like. Like part of me is like, don't track me. But the other part is when I'm buying a car, I want to know what the battery degradation is. I want to know how far it's going to drive. I know
Yeah.
how reliable has this thing been over its lifespan. And it it is not scary data that you are compiling. It's not, like where have I driven? It's the overall data as to what
Yeah,
can I expect as
100%.
a
Yeah, and
consumer.
I think we're doing this the right way, like so here, Ed, here's my pitch to get you to sign your car up. Like here's what we track. We track odometer 3 times a day. Odometer, the vehicle's range estimate, its state of charge, whether it's plugged in or not, whether it's charging or not, right? So that's sort of like the general set. We get a little bit more on Tesla's like external temperature, internal temperature,
Hmm.
that kind of thing. But that's basically it, right?
Hmm.
We don't track your location at all. And honestly, that question came up early on. The only reason we would have wanted it was as a proxy
Climate.
for temperature. Yeah, that's it, right? But Teslas just give us the temperature directly. So like,
Hmm.
and then for everybody else, we ask for, when you sign up, we ask for your home zip code, and then we just assume that you're going to be driving most of the time around
In
your
that
home,
area.
and then we just grab the weather station, like the nearest weather station at the time we take the reading, and we're like, it's probably 62 degrees, or thereabouts.
Hmm.
So so we really said like, hey, we're gonna make sure that the data that comes in from our owners is like they get to decide how that raw data gets used. They can, if somebody says, hey, we do get to sometimes of like, I think some people are like, okay, I'm ready to sell my car, it's actually kind of crappy, and they'll write to us and they'll say, hey, can you please delete my data and close my account, and we do that, right? Um,
Good.
so yes, and so we make sure that we are very on the up and up on that, and then we also don't track any creepy stuff, So that feels like, again, I think the right way of doing this. I do think
Hmm.
that, like, as you go down the road, like, it's going to be a red flag if you don't share that in the future. But hey, that's your choice.
Hmm. Well, Scott, I'm really glad we could pull this together. I think I think it's a really unique service, and as the proportion of EVs grows, especially in the used market, it's going to be an ask for sort of thing. I think for used EV owners is, hey, do you have the Recurrent report? And more, whether it's private party or franchise dealers,
Yeah.
they don't have it. They're going to be at a competitive disadvantage. I think
You're
so.
blind. You're flying blind. It,
Yeah.
and the fact that the data is there, if somebody is not supplying it at
Yeah.
this point,
Yeah. What's the
it's
problem here? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's suspicious the
Yeah.
second that
Yeah.
somebody doesn't have the information. So Ed, apparently you need to sign up.
You got to sign
I
up.
guess so. So Scott, where whether dealers or EV, I guess considerers or purchasers or which I guess recurrentauto.com, I'm
Yeah,
assuming.
so right
Yes.
after you go to the Watt Car store, that's
Yes.
wattcar.com/store, is that right?
Excellent. That's
Yes.
right.
Right after you go to that store and get your Watt Car gear, you can come to recurrentauto.com, and there's a link there for EV owners, free service, and it's cool. It's like it's fun to get the data each month, and it doesn't like wildly change, but we try and make it engaging and interesting, and then we're there for you when you are ready to sell and upgrade to your next EV.
Awesome. Well, maybe we could have you on, I don't know, year, 18 months from now and get I'll keep an eye on news about your company. But yeah, this was great.
Yeah, let's do that. No, that's fun.
For sure.
All day long I just nerd out on the EVs, so it just now I'm doing it on the podcast. That's fine.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks, guys.